My name is Marius Sieverding. I'm a senior statistician at the Evidence and Value Generation Group here at Verimed, where we do all the non-clinical and market access studies and services. My background is in epidemiology and statistical programming before I moved to HTA statistics. And I'm really happy today that I can present you a topic on the new evidence synthesis in the new EU HTA legislation. So as stakeholders in the healthcare industry, we kind of understand the critical role that health technology assessment plays in evaluating the value of new therapies and actually bringing them to the market. In this dynamic landscape of the European Union, where the HTA process is actually now evolving, it is really crucial to stay informed and empowered to make these strategic decisions. Today, we will delve into the intriguing topic of PICO and Estimand and discover how these frameworks are reshaping the way we approach clinical trials and market access, basically, in the EU. In this webinar, we will not only break down the complexities of PICO and Estimand, but also explore a bit the potential pitfalls and challenges that arise when translating between these two powerful frameworks. After the first part, the presentation, we will have a Q&A and a panel discussion with our guest Arthur Alignol. So just to give you a quick introduction, Arthur is currently HTA and medical affairs statistician at Daiichi Sankyo. Before he joined Daiichi Sankyo, he worked as a real-world data scientist at Merck Healthcare and at academia. He was specializing in observational studies and complex event history analysis. He's actively involved in the PSIF by HTA Special Interest Group, which provides a lot of support and guidance for the EU HTA change and the PICO estimate topic. Please put all the questions that you have, as Andrew mentioned, please put them in the chat so we can collect them, and we're going to try to answer, of course, all of them as part of the Q&A in the end. So why does it all matter? So kind of a question what is the therapeutic area that needs the most resources over the next few years? So there's a really high chance that a lot of people here on the webinar will have worked on this area or will in the future. And so just some numbers as a kind of reference. Oncology trials have reached historically high levels in 2021, which are up 56% from 2016, mostly focused on rare cancer indications. And of the over 50,000 assets across all phases in development in 2021, about 34 were oncolytics. So how many of those studies have the market access experts and statisticians being involved in the design of the studies? So how much say did they have in design of the clinical endpoint, for example? From experience, these stakeholders often sit at the table after the trial is designed or even done. Regulatory approval and market access are usually seen as two separate work streams. So why is this relevant? From 2025 onwards, following the EU HTA process, it's obligatory for getting a drug on the European market, starting with oncology. So according first projections on the basis of the United 21 Joint Assessment, JA3, the new HTA process can create an exponential growth to the analysis that have to be done for market access. While looking at the process for 6 member countries, the EU HTA process increased the required analysis from 198 to 280. A request for safety analysis, as often done by Germany, would increase the number to over 400. And requesting one additional outcome and one additional subgroup would increase the necessary analysis actually to over 4,200. Every population, every outcome on every subgroup that that country requests can grow the required evidence exponentially. And this is a case study only for 6 countries, not for 27. So if we bring that together with the aforementioned scope and the expected growth of the oncology market, the question arises, how many more statisticians and how many more market access and HUR experts would we actually need to tackle those increased workload? So we can plan for this future by taking steps to prevent unnecessary extra work and anticipate regulatory requirements and gain a better acceptance rate. So we need close collaboration between earlier phases and market access teams. We need earlier planning of value dossiers combined with the flexibility in reacting to changes on the market. Collaboration and communication is key. Unfortunately, we don't always speak the same languages. So with a retrospective case study as an example, we're now looking at some pitfalls when translating between the different languages that we actually speak. Before we go into some details or some background on the UNETA regulation, I want to pull up like a quick poll and ask everyone what represents best your profession and what is your relation to the EU HTA. Just to get a bit of background, who we have here today, and yeah, just want to know a little bit more about you. So the poll should be open and visible now. Okay, so we have a good mixture. We have market access statistics, some other. So we're interesting to know what else we have got. Okay, so we have it's a split between market access and other, and between it's complicated. We have our ups and downs, so we hope we can maybe change that today. And we have a blind date today here. So yeah, we're gonna do our best to give you best introduction and maybe help you to get a better feeling, a better relationship with EU HTA. Okay, so let me talk about EU HTA just very quickly, some technical background. So when we talk about EU HTA, what we actually mean is the coming into force of the regulation 2020-82. So this aims at harmonizing the health technology assessment process across the European Union. The regulation sets common criteria and methodologies for assessing the clinical and economic value of drugs. It promotes the use of a joint scientific consultation and facilitating simultaneous assessment to actually have quicker access of innovative treatments to the patients. Member states are expected to integrate this joint clinical assessment into the national decision-making process. So it means that the countries still are in control of evaluating and of giving value to different treatments, but the clinical assessment is done in a joint way across different European countries. This legislation change aims to streamline and unify the market access process for drugs across the EU. And this is actually like a significant step towards harmonizing the assessment criteria and ensuring that we have consistent evaluation of evidence. A different word was also like thrown around a lot in this context is UNETA 21. So this is actually a network established by the EU member states to facilitate the collaboration and information exchange across member states. So UNETA 21 plays a vital role in enabling the joint scientific consultation, and it does it by coordinating and supporting the development, for example, of joint assessment reports, promoting efficiency and essentially avoiding duplication of efforts. So the regulation calls for establishment of common criteria and methodologies, and UNETA 21 contributes to that by fostering the development of the shared guidelines and standards, so that we're sure that we do have a consistent approach of the clinical and economic evaluation of health technologies. So market access is usually supported by a phase 3 study. These studies are usually designed originally to support the regulatory approval by the FDA or EMA. These studies have a slightly different scope in mind than the studies and requirements in the market access landscape. While regulatory study aim at showing the efficacy, safety, and quality of the drug, basically asking the question, how does drug X work? Is the scope of HTA the benefit of the drug compared to a standard treatment? So basically asking, how does drug X compare to drug Y? And these two things are not necessarily the same, so there can be quite a big difference. And since the market access body will communicate the required evidence in form of a PICO, we will need to translate the Estimand framework from the phase 3 studies to the PICO framework used by the HTA bodies. So before getting into detail of the Estimand and PICOs, just want to have a very quick poll to see like kind of like where we start off. Just want to know kind of like what kind of like baseline we start off for explanation so that we can see how much detail we're going to go today. So poll should be open right now. So we have like around 25% are comfortable with PICOs, but not with Estimands. Another around 25% the other way around. And yeah, around 50% are new to both. So this is great. So we're gonna do a quick background into both of them. So I think everyone is gonna get a piece of information which is valuable to them. So I can close that now. Yeah, thank you very much for voting. So Estimand. What is an Estimand? An Estimand defines actually the target of an estimation for a particular trial. So it asks the question, what do we actually want to estimate with this trial? This concept was originally introduced in the ICH E9 guidance material and should actually be the start of trial planning. So by defining the estimate while planning the trial, implicit assumptions can actually be made visible and explicit. With clarity in describing the treatment effect of interest, the communication is improved between sponsors and regulators. An estimate consists of 5 attributes, which are the treatment of interest and the alternative treatment to which we compare to, the population of patients targeted by the scientific question, the variable or the endpoint, which is like the measure to address the scientific question, which is obtained for each patient, the population level summary, which means the variable we obtain for each patient is summarized for the population, and last but not least, the intercurrent event. So intercurrent events are events which prevent us from measuring the event of interest. So if we're interested in recurrence-free survival, an intercurrent event, for example, would be death or rescue medication, because these prevent us from measuring the event that we're actually interested in. So in relation to our case study, that would mean that the treatment and the population is we're going to have pembrolizumab compared with placebo in the population of participants with high-risk stage 2 melanoma. The population level summary and the variable is the hazard ratio of recurrence-free survival. And the intercurrent event is the treatment policy strategy, which means we measure the effect without regards to any changes in therapies. And we get to that in a minute, what the treatment policy strategy actually is. So what does that say about the PICO? So the PICO framework also provides a standard format for definition of research question. But in the context of EU HTA, the PICOs are actually based on policy questions from the healthcare system. So we would expect that different member states having different healthcare systems request different PICOs. And there can actually be more than one PICO requested by each member state. So a PICO helps to transfer a health policy question into a research question. PICO is, of course, an acronym, so P for population, which is, in our case, the patients with high-risk melanoma. We have the intervention and the comparator. These are separately. Intervention is, of course, pembrolizumab. Comparator is placebo. Our outcome is the hazard ratio of the recurrence-free survival. And of course, who was paying attention has realized that we have a mismatch. So intercurrent events are not defined in PICOs. And that's kind of one of the biggest differences that we have to deal with, that there's no definition for intercurrent events. So why actually does that matter? Just a quick interlude, like why should we care that intercurrent events are actually missing from a PICO? So as an example, we have here the very simplified flowchart for this keynote study. So we have randomization. People are randomized equally to pembrolizumab and placebo. This is blinded. After recurrence happens, there's unblinding, and patients have the chance to either stay on pembrolizumab, which is called rechallenge, or they can change from placebo to pembrolizumab, which is called crossover. So we have our main endpoint, which is measured here at recurrence. And if we were interested over survival, the thing is that we would expect that the majority of death events will happen after recurrence. It's just like from history now that after recurrence, the survival probability reduces. So we have a higher probability of measuring overall survival after recurrence. What does it mean is that we have potentially an intercurrent event here, because the longer the follow-up time, the more patients from placebo are treated with pembrolizumab, and we're actually going to dilute our treatment effect, because in the end we will have patients in both groups which are treated with pembrolizumab, and we have a separation that we actually want to see. So how we could deal with that? So there are different possible intercurrent event strategies. There is treatment policy, which we have seen before is the one we have in our Estimand. This is like we measure the outcome of interest regardless of the occurrence of the intercurrent event. So this is similar, but not the same as the intention to treat analysis. We have the composite strategy. So here the variable of intercurrent event is woven into the outcome variable. So recurrence-free survival for patients who are not crossing over. We have the hypothetical strategy. So we assume that the event did not happen. So that is, of course, hypothetical. So we need a modeling approach to actually measure that. Principal datum. So patients who are likely not having the current event, who are most likely would not cross over. And while on treatment, we measure our time to event only as long as we don't have the current event. As soon as the event happens, we start measuring. In our PICO framework, which defines the evidence that we need to generate, this is not described. It is our responsibility to translate between Estimand and PICO and be aware of these seemingly small differences. When selecting evidence to submit, all the small details matter. As a takeaway, implicit assumptions and decisions are made visible when defining the Estimand. So even when your study documents do not explicitly describe them, take the time to write them out and assess the implications to your PICO. Having a mismatch between your Estimand and your PICO can be invisible when looking at the market access study only. That the PICO does not define intercurrent events does not matter, doesn't mean that those do not have an effect on the evidence. Another example, also based on the case study, to show how important like this it is to check the difference between PICO and Estimand. So here we have again our keynote study with this is our PICO, and PICO is based on the Estimand that we extracted from the regulatory study. So the comparator that was selected is placebo, which is equivalent to what they call watchful waiting. The reason being that there's actually no treatment currently available for this patient group. When submitting to German authorities for reimbursement negotiation, the German GBA requested an additional comparator, interferon alpha, in addition to placebo. This drug is approved for treating high-risk melanoma, but procurement on the German market was questionable. The thing is that the manufacturer Roche had actually announced to take this product off the market and not renew the license. It is, of course, difficult and also honestly questionable to run a phase 3 study with a comparator which will be off the market soon. But since it could still be that treatment takes place, Germany requested this comparator and actually in the end denied any additional benefit on the basis that the appropriate comparator was not presented. So misspecification of PICO and error in the pre-planning can have severe consequences, as in this case where the benefit was actually completely denied. The solution, of course, cannot be to add a comparator, which will be off the market soon, to a phase 3 study. In this case, of course, one would propose to carry out an indirect treatment comparison to evaluate the effect of pembro versus interferon alpha. And of course, as statisticians, we are curious. We just wanted to know how that could turn out. So we did a very small analysis. So we did a quick literature research and used our internal web-based tool for indirect treatment comparisons, which let us easily calculate different ITCs using different Bayesian and frequentive methods. And after a quick literature research and adding the appropriate studies on interferon alpha to VeraNet, we get the following evidence network. So with the keynote study, which is pembro versus placebo, and the network of all the interferon alpha studies, which are appropriate in terms of population, we can use placebo as a common comparator between these two and assess efficacy of pembro versus interferon alpha. And this is, of course, just a very quick analysis to see in which direction the effect would go. For proper analysis, one would probably use some kind of systematic literature review provider, such as DistillSR or something else, to get a more complete and regular updated evidence network. And this was just because we were curious to see how that would have turned out. So actually, as a result, we can see that pembrolizumab shows a promising treatment effect compared to interferon alpha in the treatment of participants with high-risk melanoma. This is, of course, no guarantee that this would have changed the evaluation. It's just very unfortunate that Germany directly rejected the value proposal. So as a summary, communication about study population needs to be done as early as possible. HUR professionals should be able to provide input into design of studies for regulatory approval, since these will be most likely be needed for market access and for the pricing negotiation. The continuous monitoring for the therapeutic landscape and competitors is necessary. National authorities do not request a PICO based on the studies used for regulatory approval. The PICO is based on the national health policy. So by monitoring the market, we can be prepared for changes in the national health policies and generate evidence or indirect evidence if necessary. So going back to the slide from the beginning, close collaboration is really important to ensure that all relevant comparators and populations are covered. Or at least we know what is missing so that we can plan for generating additional evidence. Generating the additional evidence can take time, and with the increased workload from the EU HTA process, we need to start earlier planning. We need the flexibility to ensure awareness of upcoming changes in the landscape and anticipate how this will affect market access. As with manufacturers pulling products from the market, new competing products being released, the requirements for market access change all the time. So we talked. Before we talk about further resources, I want to do a little poll in the end to see how I feel and how is your personal outlook to EU HTA. And maybe we're able to change that a little bit, but I just want to see how you feel. If you're like 1, the workload might not be worth it, was like the worst option, or 10, you're like really excited and stoked that we're going to finally see some streamlining across the European Union. Okay, so we're getting the first post on. We're somewhere in the middle. So we have the most votes are voting for 5 and 7. So some are indecisive in the middle, but we have some people who are also really excited about EU HTA. Okay, perfect. That's good to know. So if you're still a bit on the edge about it, we hope that we can now give you some resources about what is coming. So we talked now a lot about the differences between the PICOs and the Estimands, but we didn't really touch a lot how to actually transfer the intercode event to the PICO, which is not a trivial question. And so this different topic you can actually learn about this year and the beginning of next year. And Arthur can shed now some light on what is actually planned for the next 3 months.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. So both Marius and I are part of the PSI FPI HTA special interest group, and we will continue on this journey to delve into these differences between PICO and Estimand, among all the other activities that this subgroup is doing. So if you can go to the next slide. So the subgroup or the special interest group of the PSI has, I think, around 70 members and growing. And if you want to have more information, you can follow the QR code that is on the right of the slides, where you will find information on what the HTA SIG is doing, as well as a way or link to be included in this group. So what we've been doing so far, in particular for EU HTA, was to provide input into the public consultation of the EU NETA 21 methodological deliverables, also collecting input to the EQUIC method papers. Some members of the HTA SIG are working on some methodology topics, such as PROs, treatment switching, trying to discuss on open source tools for all these HTA analysis coming or already running. And we are also trying to work with other SIGs of the PSI Aspire, such as the estimating the launch and life cycle, and the historical data special interest groups. And it's also planned to have papers and white papers, in particular on positions or statistical positions on the UHTA, on estimates, etc. So we invite you to follow this link and help us on this journey. Next slide, please. So in particular, really on the topic of PICO and estimates, we've planned a couple of webinars. The first one is scheduled towards the end of the year. There we will dig deeper into the different frameworks that exist that you can use to describe your research questions. So today we discussed about, Marius discussed about the estimates and the PICOs. There is also the target trial emulation framework proposed by Anand, especially for real-world data. So this webinar will include some external experts to discuss these three different frameworks. What are the commonalities? What are the differences? And how we can start to bridge them. And then a second webinar should come next year, where they will try to have something that is more hands-on. Really, how do you translate a PICO research question to an Estimand one, and vice versa. Next slide, please. There is also another group that is pretty much interested in these questions. That's the late phase HTA and real-world evidence subgroup of the Estimand implementation working group. So this group is there to bring together health economists, epidemiologists, and statisticians to support the Estimand journey. They had an excellent presentation at the last PSI conference in London, looking into also PICOs and estimates, in particular regarding external validity, as well as how to start to translate one into the other. They are also planning to have presentation and potentially courses at the next ISPOR Europe meeting, and have also a webinar on the way for next year touching on all these different questions. So a lot is coming, and so stay tuned for updates on this topic towards the end of the year and next year.
Yeah, I can only reiterate the invitation to join the HTA SIG at PSI. So if you're interested in the topic, it's a better way also to learn more about it. Of course, it's always good to have support and have more people supporting the SIG, but you're gonna learn a lot and meet great, interesting people. So yeah, please scan the QR code and join us. Okay, yeah, for the Q&A, so if you have questions, put it in the box. So I want to ask Asa, so what is kind of like your personal opinion? So what are you excited about the EU HTA changes? So what opportunities do you think that will bring?
So the first thing I see is job security, because right now EU HTA I think will bring we'll have a lot of things to do. So yeah, that won't get boring. What I'm excited about also more seriously is I see really a potential within the next 10 or 15 years to have more homogeneity in the treatment landscape in Europe via this new process. I think it's quite down the road. Right now, it's more of there are more hurdles, but I'm excited. Yeah, in the long term, I think that will be a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that you just mentioned, like right now, it's just we see more the hurdles than we see like the opportunities with. I think, I mean, what do you think are like the greatest hurdles that we gonna see like in the implementation?
So right now there are still a lot of things that are unclear, in particular around timing. So when will the final PICO will be known? So that's not clear how long so how much time we will have to actually do the analysis. So what that means is that potentially we will have to work at risk or plan in advance without being really able to talk to the different players. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainties in the kind of the roles we'll have. The second hurdle is that this joint clinical assessment mandated by the new regulation, that will only be an opinion, and then the final decision on reimbursement will still be made by the countries. So I think a lot of heterogeneity on the kind of data that is accepted is still to be expected between all the member states. So that will still be, access will still be complicated.
Yeah. I think like a lot of people are like afraid of having the double work of feeling that it's not going to be like a real change, because countries can, after the joint clinical assessment, still like require additional evidence. So people are afraid that they go through all this summarizing PICO, doing all the evidence, and then Germany comes and still requests all they're gonna still request, which have requested before. So I think that's definitely a fear that a lot of people have. And I also saw a submission for a paper, also I think for the ISPOR, where they evaluated if countries will actually be able to summarize all the requirements into the 3 PICOs that this has been like from like, it's going to be maximum 3 PICOs. And looking at retrospective submissions, it would probably not be realistic, looking at what has been submitted, that there's only going to be 3 PICOs. So it could be that each country requests more than 3 PICOs, and if we have 27 countries and we're going to collate it together, that could actually end up to like a huge number of outcomes that we have to create.
Yeah, so, I think there are still provisions to change the guidelines, and maybe there is hope to say that we try to limit that by design, but I'm not sure of that. So yeah, I would expect in some indications a lot of potential PICOs, especially if what I'm more afraid of is in terms of standard of care in the different countries. That is still very heterogeneous, that the C part of the PICO will lead to a lot of additional work.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it brings me really gallantly to my next question. I mean, it was like the standard of care, as we've seen in the example, indirect treatment comparisons are going to be like even more important so that we can adjust our study to all the different standard of care that we have on the market, different healthcare systems. So kind of like we see that getting more traction, but like what is the current landscape in HTA submissions, and what do you think will happen in the future for EU HTA?
So what do you mean in terms of methods?
No, of like acceptance of indirect treatment comparisons on the current market.
So the EU NETA provided some guidance in the kind of evidence they would consider acceptable. So at least what is kind of clear is that in terms of indirect treatment comparison, the preferred anchored indirect treatment comparison that preserve the randomization, so that let the Bucher methods as well as the network meta-analysis. What they really don't like is an anchored comparison with aggregated data. So an anchored MIC or STCs will be a problem. At least reading the guideline, they would kind of accept single-arm trials with external control arm only if individual patient data for the control arm are available, which would allow to use the right techniques to adjust for the differences between the control arm and the single-arm trial. So at least the provisions in the methods are there. The question then will be the acceptance on the different markets. You have markets that are more strict than other in terms of the acceptance they would accept. So yeah, in general, Germany being less flexible than some of the more cost-effectiveness markets.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's likely to stay heterogeneous for some time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still going to be, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's still going to be countries doing the decision making. So if Germany is still a bit on the fence about ITCs, it's going to be hard to change that. Although Germany, this is always EU HTA sometimes criticized for Germany having a huge impact on the methodology, on the processes. So, but ITC, there's guidelines about that. So I guess like, how do we do that without ITCs? It's going to be impossible. Like mentioned, standard of care is going to be so different across all different countries. So I guess we will need some kind of more acceptance from Germany if that's supposed to work. We get another interesting question from the audience. So is real-time data streaming applied for HTA? Will they improve the decision-making? Do you know anything about that?
No.
I have to admit, I also would have to get back to that audience member on that topic. So I also don't know yet if that anything that is planned for the HTA right now. Okay, I have one very quick last question. I hope it's quick. I know that you have a bit of background in real-world data, and I know that I don't want to pull up like a huge big topic because I know that is a big topic, but we do see a lot more submissions right now using real-world data. So what is kind of like your thought on that? Will that continue with EU HTA, or do we see maybe a shift in the future?
So looking at the methods, the methods paper from EU NETA, you can still read, not just between the lines or even clearly in the methods, that RCT, so randomized clinical trial, or the preferred evidence to be provided. That, like I mentioned, for the indirect treatment comparison, there would be space for acceptance of, let's say, an external control arm based on real-world data, provided that the individual patient data are available. Again, the question is on acceptance by the different countries. Obviously, especially in oncology, an endpoint like progression is not collected in the same way in an interventional trial and in real-world evidence. So that's for the later, that's definitely investigator progression kind of. The scheduler's assessment is not mandated by a protocol, so then that will depend a bit on the countries what kind of objections they can put on that. I mean, these are known problems of real-world data compared to an interventional trial. Then the question is, what will the different players will say about these differences? Whether some will say, no way, we don't accept that because that's not a regular schedule of assessments, and okay, we can accept that with more uncertainty.
At least we now have like a more common guidelines on methodology and quality requirements than we had before. So maybe it's going to be open the door a bit more for some countries, maybe which have been on the fence before.
Yeah. Then evidence that is entirely based on real-world data, I don't know. I can't remember from the top of my head whether anything is mentioned. So I was thinking like dossiers that are for line extensions, etc. Don't remember from the top of my head what would be the possibilities there.
Yeah. There's one follow-up question on real evidence. So see if maybe that's something you know from the top of your head. From your experiences, how real evidence accepted for rare diseases, and kind of like what type of evidences. I mean, it is something for rare diseases which I think has seen more application because it is easier to get cases in that. So, what's your experience in that?
Again, I think it will be country specific, but if you manage to have an orphan drug designation, even the German process becomes a bit easier and you accept a wider type of evidence. I think you have to make your case. The evidence will be looked at, and but I don't have direct experience with rare disease, so I can't go. I can only based on what I've read from the guidelines, and there is nothing specific to rare disease. The guidelines, I would say, okay, in this case we would accept that and that.
Yeah.
So that's still hard to say.
I think that again is like this evaluation of the evidence is then what again is country specific. So we still have to see which country is more willing to accept this kind of evidence. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Arthur, for your time and for your experience. Then I think I'm going to close the Q&A session and close the webinar. So I will hand it back to Andrew, who will lead us out. And again, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you all, and thanks for having me.